Welcome to the first in a series of conversations with candidates from the Mass Food System Collaborative. We've invited all of the candidates for governor and lieutenant governor to join us to talk about their positions on food system policy priorities. And the first to take us up on the offer is Senator Eric Lesser. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Wynton. Good morning, Becca.
Thanks for being here with us this morning. I want to start out just sort of broadly and give you a chance to talk a little bit about your thoughts on food system issues, what's been a priority for you, and how you've been talking about it in your campaign.
Well, thanks, Wynton, and thanks, Becca. And I do just first want to say thank you to the Mass Food System Collaborative. It's really been a great joy to work very closely with you and with your members over the last 8 years in the state Senate. My district and the area where I come from in the greater Springfield area has a lot of farms. And the way I like to describe it is I've got some of the densest urban communities in Massachusetts. I also have a town without a stoplight. I have a major, financial services company, Mass Mutual, based in my district. And I have many family-owned farms, agriculture, economy, as well as everything in between. So, food and food policy is really important to the area I've represented in the Senate and will be a very central part of my work as lieutenant governor. And just something kind of on a high level that's important, I think, to remind people of is when people think about the Massachusetts economy, when they think about our state, just generally, what tends to come up is the eds and the meds, right? The big educational institutions, the world leading healthcare and life sciences sector. Those are essential parts of our economy, obviously, and really distinguish us as a state and as a Commonwealth. But we're also a farming state, and we're also an agriculture state. We've got cranberries, on the South Coast and on the Cape. You've got an incredible fishing heritage, in Gloucester, New Bedford, and all the points in between. And we have a really vibrant agricultural sector, including, asparagus in Deerfield, the best asparagus in the world, and so much else all across. Of course, maple syrup. So this is a big sector for us, and it's a big part of our economy, and it's also a really big part of our cultural heritage in Massachusetts. It drives tourism. Norman Rockwell, the scenes of rural New England life. It drives investment. It also helps fulfill and feed our souls because it creates an opportunity to engage with natural habitat and to engage with natural, healthy food. So it's an important sector for us, and it's an important item for me personally. And it's been an underappreciated sector. So I know we have a lot of questions, but I'll just kind of close this by saying, as lieutenant governor, I think one of the most important things I could do is help lift and amplify our food systems in Massachusetts and help shed more light on them, bring more attention to them, and hopefully make the state government more of a partner to this sector so that we can see it continue to grow and continue to thrive.
Thanks for that. So you mentioned economics. How do you see inflation and other economic challenges impacting the food system, both in terms of producers and food businesses, and as well as on the consumer side? And what interventions do you think the state could make that would help ensure sustainable production and equitable access to healthy food?
Yeah, really important question. Grocery bills are going up for people. Labor costs are going up. It's a high stress point, and food policy is unique because obviously people need to eat, and access to food is a fundamental right. And that just adds, I think, the importance and the sort of high stakes nature of getting this right. So just a couple of things. Let's talk about producers first, and then I'll talk about consumers, people who are eating the food. So on the producer side, you've got a very challenging environment for farms and for fishermen, fisherwomen, and people engaged in agriculture and in food production across the board. You have skyrocketing input costs. The costs of fertilizer, the cost of materials, the cost of seed is going up. You have fast rising labor costs. and you have an inflationary environment that's creating some challenges for also the sales on the back end of that. The pricing becomes more complicated, predicting demand becomes more complicated, and the continued variance of COVID creates an unstable environment. If restaurant attendance goes down, a lot of farms can't quickly redirect that to a grocery store or to another venue. And so it's just created a very unstable and a very unpredictable situation. And it's particularly challenging in Massachusetts because we pride ourselves on frankly smaller scale agriculture, right? I'm here in Western Mass. We don't have big factory farms the way you've got, maybe in other parts of the country. For the most part, we've got smaller scale, often family owned farms and agriculture that are kind of run on shoestrings and are run based on kind of family tradition and on instinct. So it's created a very challenging environment. But we do have some models for how we can help. So just an example from COVID, and I know Winton and Becca, you're very familiar with this, but CISA in Western Mass, when the UMass dining services closed during COVID, you had all of these farms in Western Massachusetts that had been supplying food and produce and other products to UMass dining services. And they had thousands and thousands of students eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner there every single day. All of a sudden that turned off. The food is still growing. It still needs to be picked. The tomatoes need to be picked. The cotton needs to be, the corn needs to be picked and everything else. So what do you do? They had a situation where they were going to have to destroy or throw out this food because they didn't have a consumer and they didn't have a distribution channel that they could change. We had a lot of partners, including CISA, that helped redirect that to food pantries, for example, and to food banks across the state, and to other distribution points where people needed help. So that type of scale, that type of expertise coming in to help, a farm or an agricultural area that's facing some level of uncertainty is really, really important. And I think as Lieutenant Governor, that's a role I can play, is staying in touch with our producers, our farmers, staying in touch with Food Systems Collaborative, with CISA and organizations like it all over the state to really provide that support. Now, on the consumer end, we have a very challenging situation. People are hurting. Inflation is very high. People's grocery bills have gone up astronomically. And we're entering a very, very stressful economic picture. And so what that inevitably means is that people will need more support and more help getting access to food, especially fresh, nutritious food that's locally grown. So I know no stranger to this group, but continuing to expand the HIP program, Healthy Incentives Program, which allows people to use food supports at farmers markets, is going to be very important in this environment, especially as the economy faces struggles. Continuing to expand the MeFAP program, which is a program I've championed for 6 years in the Senate, which helps purchase food from local farms and distributes it to Massachusetts food banks to then get out to people who need it. We're going to probably need to expand that program significantly. And something that we just did in the legislature, which is universal free school meals, is also very important. And I want to make sure that we are connecting our local farms, our local producers to that program so that young people in our schools are able to access, local healthy food. It's a win-win. It obviously gives young people access to that healthy food, and it helps support our local agricultural economy. I know I'm going a little long here, but the reason that the local agriculture is so important, take HIP, for example. If you have a food, a TANF or a food voucher, and you go and you buy, a processed product that's made somewhere else, that money is going back to that huge company and is actually leaving the state, and it's distributed to their shareholders or whatever. But if you're going to a local farmers market and you're buying produce or fruit or anything, local meat, that's been raised or grown in Massachusetts, there's a multiplier effect of that spending. The person, obviously gets the fresh access to the fresh food. The farmer, gets the money, and the farmer is based here. So the farmer is employing people here, is buying equipment here, is supporting and paying taxes on land here. And so that dollar that's spent is recirculated in the economy locally many, many times over, which has really important benefits for us in Massachusetts. So we've got to be mindful of that and do everything we can to promote local purchasing of local agriculture.
So the state has a lot of priorities, and you know this from your time in the Senate, and your focus. You have been focused on food, but you've also been very focused on a lot of other issues, and so public health and transportation and housing, and often these issues compete for attention. They compete for resources. Thinking particularly about land issues around farmland versus the need for more housing. And often, or very rarely, is the food system considered as part of the equation in any of these other issues. So how would you ensure that the needs of the food system are considered when these other issues are being discussed, and when plans are developed, when priorities are set?
I think it's a really good question, Winton, because there is a lot on everybody's plate and there's a lot competing for attention. And I think what I would say on a high level is not to think of it as a binary choice or an either or, right? You either do housing policy or you do farmland, or you focus on healthcare or you focus on food policy. I think the way conceptually I approach this topic is that it's actually integrated into and is a fundamental part of all of these policies, right? It's actually cross-disciplinary by nature. So take healthcare. We could spend everything in the world on healthcare, but if people aren't eating healthy, if they don't have access to healthy food, if they don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, a lot of that goes to waste. So, for example, integrating and building food policy into the state's healthcare systems is really important and helps both. Take education. I've done a lot of work over the years with Breakfast After the Bell, which is universal breakfast programs in schools. We just did the universal meals for lunch. So that's another example, right? I mean, we have really important educational equity goals in Massachusetts. We have one of the best public school systems in the country, but we have a lot of work to do to help in the gaps and the places where schools have fallen behind. Food policy actually a big part of that. It's hard to focus on math or science or reading when you've got an empty stomach. So we can partner with agriculture, we can partner with farms to bring food into schools and into classrooms, and that solves and helps solves educational goals. I mean, thinking about tourism, people want to be in natural, beautiful places. That tends to include farms. You mentioned housing. I actually think that they're complementary. People want to live in nice places, right? Where there's natural scenery and where it's not endless parking lots. And I think being smart about our zoning and being smart about, for example, transit-oriented development allows you to do both, have good, affordable places to live and protect natural heritage at the same time. And by the way, the housing challenges are important in the agriculture sector as a sector, right? It's very hard to find good, stable housing for farm workers, for people that work in agriculture. So all of these issues really actually overlap with each other and are sort of integrated with each other. And so I think the approach I've always brought in the Senate, and the approach I would bring as Lieutenant Governor, is to think about how we work to integrate all of these so that it's not either or, but it's together. How do we make them both better?
Thank you. So the food system has been shaped by generations of systemic racism. And what can the public sector do, particularly the state, obviously, to support more equity in the food system? And what would you focus on as Lieutenant Governor?
Well, it's a very important question, and it is a very, very long history. And first, the history needs to be acknowledged and it needs to be taught. And so people need to understand, how farm workers have been treated, throughout history, who farm workers and agricultural workers have tended to be, largely immigrants, people of color, very low paid with very little benefits or job stability. This is grueling work, outside in the hot sun, doing really literally backbreaking work. And it's work that's essential for our society, right? Because people need to eat. So I think better education and better illumination of that history and that current situation is important. And the other thing is we've got to update labor practices. We've got to update worker protections. We've got to give more opportunity for farm workers to make a transition to maybe owning or managing their own farms. And creating more opportunity for wealth creation there. And we've got to work to expand access to the sector, which has historically been, at least in Massachusetts, overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. So these are important goals, and we've done some of that work, Winton, in the legislature around the Food Policy Caucus. But I think we've got to do a lot more, and I think it's got to be centered around protections for workers, safety for workers, upward mobility for the workforce, which is really important, and making sure that we're promoting land ownership and new farm creation and family farm creation for minority and underrepresented groups as well.
I want to ask about climate change, and farms and agriculture have a sort of unique position in that they're incredibly threatened by climate change, and at the same time they, by virtue of the management practices they use and the amount of land that they steward, they can play a significant role in helping the state meet its climate change goals. To date, they haven't really been at the table for the climate change discussions and policy setting. So what role do you think the state can have in helping farmers address the challenges of climate change, and how can the state better integrate the aspects of agriculture that can actually help the state meet its goals?
So a really important question, and it actually goes back to that question about either or, and all the different issues competing for attention. Climate change, obviously one of the most urgent issue we face in Massachusetts, and agricultural policy does need to be a part of the state's climate goals. So it's both in terms of open space preservation, which is very important, carbon capture, especially with the space for forest preservation, and giving the agricultural community more of a seat at the table in terms of how climate policy and how environmental policy is fashioned. And I think that that's really the key. We just passed a very, very ambitious environmental package that we did back in July. Rolling that out, implementing it, making sure we're hitting our 5-year climate targets towards net zero is going to require the coordination and input and expertise of the agricultural community. So as Lieutenant Governor, with a lot of experience in agriculture and food policy, and coming from a part of the state where agriculture and food policy is so central to what we do, I think I could really play a role at giving the community a seat at the table, making sure that they're working with, the energy secretary, working with natural resources, working with DPU where necessary, to basically operate as a partner in achieving these climate goals.
So to make you step away from policy for a minute, wanted to ask you if you have particular personal interactions with the food system, and that stand out for you, that have made you aware of how the food system works, made you aware of what the challenges might be, something that's not necessarily related to your policy work.
Well, I mean, it's living in Western Mass, that gives you really an appreciation. The area where I am, Springfield is obviously a big, dense city, but you drive just a couple minutes out of Springfield and actually even in Springfield, there's farms. So it's a really important part of our economy. It's a really important part of our sector. And I think it is underappreciated in our state. When I'm the only candidate on any ballot line from outside of 495. And I think part of the reason, kind of to some of the questions you've been asking, is the sense that agriculture policy has not gotten the attention it needs That's not the case in a lot of states where agriculture is a huge, a huge part of their economies. But in Massachusetts, it's a big part of our economy, but doesn't get a lot of attention. And I think that is in part because we haven't had, large numbers of people from Western Mass or from other agricultural parts of our state, at high levels of the executive branch, and that would change. But I think the appreciation came from, growing up here, growing up in an agricultural area. And I did, when I was in high school, I briefly worked at a Christmas tree farm, but that's about the extent of my direct agricultural experience. But it was convenient to hire a Jewish guy to work at the Christmas tree farm because I could work right through Christmas Eve, and didn't have to take any time off or anything. So that was fun. But it's also, I think, something to keep in mind is that these are also small businesses. And when we talk about, business development, when we talk about wealth creation, when we talk about upward mobility and opportunity for people, small business is always at the heart of that. And farms are small businesses, especially our farms that we've got for the most part in Massachusetts. And so you're not only promoting healthy eating, you're not only protecting open space, but you are helping create opportunity and mobility for families by promoting this sector. So,
All right. Well, I want to thank you. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time and your thoughtful answers on these questions.
hey, thanks. Yeah, take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.